Hey, sorry that last video stopped at slide 206. I'm going to try to get through the rest of this PowerPoint. It should only take me about 10 more minutes to finish this PowerPoint. So you have to know about the cult of domesticity and separate spheres for women. That was in middle class or rich homes. The poor, of course, everybody had to work. Everybody worked, everybody worked, everybody worked. That's only middle class homes or rich, of course, where women had a separate sphere and they would never work. Oh, wait. When the whistle blows at 6, I come home and get supper, then I put children to bed. Working class women. So the working class women, they had to do their jobs all day, but then after 10 or 12 hours working in somebody else's home, they would have to go home and take care of their own children and feed their own family. FYI, many women, then and now, nannies, whoever else, have often been sexually abused at the hands of the men in the household because they were in such a system where they were considered less than, that they couldn't argue or complain if the husband had molested them or raped them. They couldn't complain because they would lose the job, and it was a job that was so critical to them being able to survive that they weren't even allowed to say anything. So as you can imagine, these young women were in a very difficult situation in many of these households where it was dangerous for them at times from the master of the house. Urban life was stressful on women and families who were often separated by work. So a lot of women went to the cities and they didn't live with their families anymore like they had done for thousands of years on a farm. I'm only a piece of machinery that nobody realizes the value of unless I stop. Unless I stop. Florence Kelly. Settlement houses were centers of women's activism. Florence Kelly fought for women workers' rights. She was the toughest customer in the Reform riot, the finest rough and tumble fighter for the good life for others that the movement ever knew. Florence Kelly. Famous. Fighting for women's rights. And then, of course, this is helping women to try to get the 19th Amendment passed. Don't forget that in 1867, 68, something like that, when the 15th Amendment was passed for all male suffrage, women had been on that amendment. And then at the last minute, they struck women out of it because they didn't think they could get the amendment passed if they left women on. And then famously, we have the perfect 36, that we need 36 states to agree to ratify women's suffrage. So in every single state, they have to vote about whether they think women should have the right to vote. And famously, I think his name is like John Byrne or something like that, a guy here in Tennessee, one of the state senators, because the state of Tennessee had to vote on it, and they all wore a certain color flower, I feel like red and yellow or something like that. But he was going to vote against women's suffrage, and then it came down to the very last vote, and whatever that vote happened to be is how it was going to be. And this guy got a note from his mommy. His mommy literally sent a note to Congress and said, be a good boy and vote for women's right to vote. And so he literally took the rose or the flower off and he went to the other side and he voted in Tennessee to say that women's suffrage should happen. And as a result of that, they were the 36th state, which is what they needed to pass an amendment, 36 out of the 50 states to pass an amendment. And so the 19th Amendment passed here in Nashville, Tennessee because of that one man's vote, because his mother sent a letter to him and said, be a good boy and vote for women. So that happened. National American Women's Suffrage Association was led by Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony. That was in the 1880s or 1890s. Men, their rights and nothing more. Women, their rights and nothing less. Wyoming was the first to offer women unrestricted suffrage. So don't forget, in states, women could have the right to vote. So all the way back to 1869, they had given women the right to vote in Wyoming. They were the very first one. Jeanette Rankin is going to come from there, the very first senator, the very first female senator. Wyoming. Okay, and then Ida B. Wells rallied for better treatment for blacks. She formed the National Association of Colored Women in 1896. And a lot of the suffragists in the United States of America wanted her to march with them and everybody else to march, but they expected the black women to march at the end of the parade. So she said, no. Oh, heck no. We will not march in the back of the parade. So she refused to have them march because she's like, no, we aren't less than. We are still women. Are we not all trying to get women the right to vote? And indeed, it was very prejudiced against black women getting the right to vote. No nation, savage or civilized, save only the United States of America, has confessed its inability to protect its women. You're going to hear about Ida B. Wells much more about anti-lynching laws. In the 1890s and 1900s, women, men, well, mostly men, black men, are being lynched. Mostly about 2 to 3 men a week across the United States of America are being lynched every week for decades. For decades, we're lynching, we're killing these people. It's awful. So she's a very huge advocate about an anti-lynching campaign, and she also started the National Association for Colored People, for NAACP, National Association for Colored People with W.E.B. Du Bois. The appeal of the press and Gilded Age literature. You have to know about the press. The press was highly, highly significant in the late 1890s and early 1900s. Late 19th century, 1890s, 1880s, 1890s, Americans were prolific readers as libraries, newspapers, and magazines flourished and great literary works emerged. Remember, in the late 1890s, 1900s, there aren't radios yet. The very first radio, Marconi has the very first radio in like the late 1890s, but it's radio waves. Radio, real live radio, isn't until the 1920s. And TV, of course, not till like after World War II and after 1945. And so everybody read. Everybody read. It's only been the past like 50, 70 years that people haven't really read. 1945, 55, 75 years. Before World War II, everybody read. Everybody read. There wasn't TV. There wasn't TV. Nobody had TV. There was radio sometimes. There were daily newspapers, hundreds and hundreds of daily newspapers. People read books. They couldn't wait to get their hands on books. Everybody read. Like today, we read our